So I'm very happy to bring up our panelists. I'm going to bring up our moderator, Jeffrey Rohrs. He's Chief Marketing Officer for Yext. How many saw the opening keynote yesterday with Yext? That was amazing. I captured the Broadway singers doing the closing number. It was just absolutely, it gave me chills. So anyway, Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and
Sounds
take
great.
it away. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Pete. All right, so we've got a great panel for you today. We will open it up to some Q&A towards the end. Let me start, and we'll bring up Andrew first. Andrew, as you come on up, why don't you give name, rank, serial number? And I think the question we're going to ask everybody is, what's your favorite voice assistant, and what's the last question you asked her or him?
Oh, you're imputing gender to this already. Okay, good. My name is Andrew Eisner. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Veritonic. We're an audio effectiveness platform, and we help our clients select and optimize voice, taxonomy, and all sorts of marketing applications for the voices that they're using on smart speakers and in other marketing applications.
Excellent.
My personal favorite right now is Alexa. Last question I asked her was, what's the weather in Newark, New Jersey?
Excellent. Thank you, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
All right, Wilson, come on up. You get to do the same thing. Tell us about yourself, your company, and your relationship with your smart speaker.
So my name is Wilson Tang. I am the Vice President of Digital Experience at Freeman. Many of you may know us if you ever produce events. We're the world's largest experiential marketing company. So we produce events like CES and NAB. And my job is actually to incubate and test out new technologies. And so voice is the new it thing. And so I have a whole team developing solutions around experiential sort of voice activations. And it's been a lot of fun. Like I'm surprised at the usage, particularly at events. Last question I asked, so my preference, I would say from a development standpoint, Lex is the way to go. But I gotta say, when I'm at home and I'm asking questions and what's gonna give me the best answer contextually is still Google.
Okay.
So last question I asked Google this morning was how to get to NJIT.
And did Google answer the question correctly?
Barely. I made it here.
You found you found a parking garage. So
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, welcome. All right, Mike, come on up. And excited to have you on board because I believe you are the only person with the official CMO title. We're playing fast and loose with titles today.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I've got two titles. So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Product Officer for Upside Door. It's an early stage company in Washington, D.C. that's focused on helping people better manage, grow, and value their greatest asset, which is their home.
Wonderful. And your favorite assistant and what you've asked that assistant last?
So from a device category, I was telling you I'm a HomePod guy. I love it for music in the home, but when it comes to voice recognition, it's Alexa. I was writing my daughter a note at camp, and she can't bring devices to this camp and all that type of stuff, and she wanted to know who won the World Cup. So I asked, what was the score for the World Cup final? So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. Ed, come on up. Ed, you actually are sitting across sales and marketing, as I understand it, in the healthcare space. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I'm a VP for marketing and product development, actually, for Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, the #1 health insurer here in New Jersey, and I also have responsibility for customer experience and our digital product management team.
Excellent. Right. And who is your personal voice assistant?
I use both Alexa and Siri. The last one I used was Siri, and really it was more to send a text to my son asking what time he was going to come home.
Excellent. What time was that?
No response. He's a millennial.
Gotcha. Welcome. Last but not least, Ken, come on up here. Welcome. And Ken, translation is your business. Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm the COO and founder of Responsive Translation. We used to be 1-800-TRANSLATE back in the day of telephone interpretation. Currently, we're translating. We touch the voice industry on the side of. We translate a lot of the audio content. That's been a big area of growth for us in recent years. And my platform and pet peeve, I use Dragon for the carpal tunnel. And the last thing I said to Dragon was writing this down for these remarks before it came.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so with introductions out of the way, let's first talk and jump in a little bit about how voice is impacting your businesses. And Mike, we were talking a little bit before. Yes? No, there is not. There is? Oh. Let's make this introduction in real time. Hello, I'm Jeff. And you are?
Chris Bernard.
Chris.
Hi, I'm a late addition.
You're a late addition. Chris.
So I'm Chris Bernard. I work at LivePerson. LivePerson is a messaging company moving well into voice.
Yes.
I run our AI solutions and also working on a lot of our endpoint pushes with respect to voice agents as well as messaging endpoints.
Well, and you guys have a long history with voice, so I'm very intrigued to hear
Yeah, so
what
it's
you
a
said.
new flavor on voice. But
Very
yes.
cool. So talk to us about your voice assistant.
So my voice assistant is Google. I'm a pretty loyal Googleist. Worked there for a long time. The latest that I've asked Google was a number of different things on the way here, including how to get here, including send some messages to a lot of people as I was driving. So it was very effective.
Excellent. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
And let's jump into this. So, Mike, back to you. You have that title of CMO and product. And whether you have that title or not, if you're working in marketing, you're thinking about those two worlds. But as we began the conversation this morning, the product angle is really interesting. Can you tell folks how voice is being cooked into the way that you go to market and the service you provide?
Yeah, so one of the things, so early in the company, what we did is we built a platform that allowed us to help people sell homes in a much more efficient way, leveraging technology to make it more efficient so that we can reduce the cost of selling a home. And with that means we're trying to get rid of people in that process. And so we did a pilot earlier this year where we put Alexa devices in homes that were for sale. And we programmed them so that people could walk up and ask questions about that home that you wouldn't necessarily find on Zillow or other things, asking them questions around, tell me more about the upgrades that have gone into this kitchen. You know, where will my kids go to school in this neighborhood, those types of things. We got a lot of really good feedback from that. And, part of it was like, how do we make ourselves look, more forward, looking on types of things, but also we believe that it was solving a consumer problem. And interestingly enough, at one point we thought, are we going to upset the buyer's agents, right, that are coming in and they actually loved it too. Really? Because, they don't know everything about a property, right? And if they can come in and ask it questions and get responses back, it helps them. I mean, they want to get a sale. So it was a really cool experiment that we ran using the Alexa Blueprint platform.
So I'm intrigued. Wilson, you are in experiential marketing. That is an experiential application of voice in that setting. How are you using it at events? Do you have any really good examples of late of how you're engaging with consumers in those different environments at events?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, just to go back to what you say about salespeople. Yeah. Whenever I mention that like our voice assistants or our voice technology is going to replace you, there's always like a nervous chuckle. Yep. Yeah. It's not quite there right now, but they can see that in a couple of years it's going to...
Just tell them it's going to enhance what they do, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. But as far as experiential and particularly events, a little bit of a background. So when we did this, we were working with Amazon and Marketo, and they had announced a partnership, and they announced it a couple of weeks before an event, and they, as with most technology companies, they announced it, but they hadn't actually built it yet. And so they needed somebody to actually build a really quick Alexa skill. And that's actually how we got into it. So we were the provider at the event, and we said, sure, we've got some engineers, we could put some time against it. And all of a sudden, people literally started calling us up. We didn't think that we weren't going to build a product around this. Customers and people just in the audience said, I needed that at my event. And I think the most interesting thing was just how shocked we all were. In fact, even my boss, when I told him we were doing this, he goes, that sounds like the dumbest idea, like putting a voice assistant at an event, because there's all this noise and all this, all this commotion going around. And kudos to Amazon. The microphones are phenomenal. We actually don't have problems on like loud trade show floors. And so it's really opened up the sort of a new way of thinking about it. The most practical application is obviously replacing that the event staff, right? So that person you have to pay that you met that morning, that knows where the bathrooms are and where the attendees are, that's the most obvious application. But because we're experiential, there's nothing more experiential than being able to talk to something or to somebody. And with events, they're high cost to produce. You've got the people you really want to talk to are like the engineers and the product managers, and they shouldn't be flying out to events, but the knowledge that they have can be programmed and then can be sent all around. So we're getting so many requests from exhibitors and sponsors saying like, look, I've got my salespeople, I got my booth babes, and I've got like my superficial literature, but people really want to dig into products, right? And so we're completely rethinking how voice can affect all aspects of event marketing, from, like I said, the concierge, to talking about products, but also being the new user interface to events.
So if I could add on there, it was really interesting. I had a very similar response from my wife when I told her that we were going to do this thing, and she's like, that's just dumb. Nobody's going to do that. And I said, okay, well, thanks for the feedback. And we went ahead and built it, and people loved it, right?
Exactly.
Because to your point, people want to interact. A brochure is one thing, or looking at something online, but if you can go deeper and tell a story in something that replicates a human interaction, we're finding that people really dig it.
Yep.
So.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
As the one that got added late, what about the data that you guys are capturing from it? Are you doing anything with that data? Or is that, because that's like a really robust way to look at things.
Tremendously so. There's something that happens when you're talking to a machine that you feel like you can be much more honest than talking to a human being.
Yeah.
And the queries that we get about the events, about what worked and what didn't work, I'm sure you guys know, in some cases you can actually just record audio for feedback. Mm-hmm. And we get all sorts of insights about things that, to be frank, human, manners and basic decency get in the way of real data-driven decisions. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've seen that time and time again in marketing in general, is that we talk about data, but half the time the people don't want to see it. With Amazon, Alexa, and all these voice services, we're collecting questions and surveys and things that people wouldn't tell another human being, and we're giving it to the show organizers, and they're actually reconfiguring their shows because of it. They didn't realize that keynote speaker just sucked, right? or there just wasn't enough time, like little things, like there wasn't enough time to go from one session, go to the bathroom, get something to eat, and do something else at the same time. But it's those kind of things, and even about the products, we hear all sorts of things. So it's really made us a very, even more so, data-driven organization.
So please, Andrew.
So a question for you guys. Are you using just the default Alexa voice, or are you experimenting with other voices that reflect the brand, Mike, your brand, or Wilson, the brands that you're representing at these shows?
So I'll be brief. I think for shows, Alexa and Google are fine, but for brands themselves, they want to have their own hot word or trigger word or wick word. And they want, because they realize that that's going to be their user interface. You're going to want to say, Samsung, do this for me, rather than Alexa, ask Samsung.
And Samsung has to have a voice that represents its brand and the experience they want their users to have.
Yeah, so I mean, I have, so as I think about it, as Alexa becomes ubiquitous, right? It seems like every month we're adding one to some place in our home. It's a familiar voice, right? And it's becoming kind of the Kleenex of, hey, go do this type of thing. Sorry, Apple and Google, but there's some familiarity. But I could see us saying, look, we want to put our own touch to this. But I think for me, from an adoption perspective, there's some goodness in going with the standard that's out there and something that people recognize. Good question. I like that.
And how is this coming to the healthcare? You have HIPAA regulations, you have different considerations than an open event. So what is the consideration and how is the application of voice right now in healthcare?
No, sure, that's a really good point. I mean, there are a lot of regulations. Folks will remember the last couple of years there have been some big data breaches that have made the front pages, and we value our members' data. It's very critical to protect that. Having said that, like most of my colleagues here, the number one goal is to make things easier for our members, right? And there are two areas where most of our members come back and say, your experience sucks, right? One is the onboarding. And when people come and sign up for a health insurance plan for the first time, they're trying to remember, what did I sign up for? What are the benefits? And we've already internally developed a pilot skill for Alexa where you can be walked through, welcome to Horizon, and then they go through, oh, just a reminder, this is the plan you bought, and can I confirm, these are your dependents, right? This is your wife, this is your son, your daughter. Now, don't forget, every time you go to a doctor, here's your copay. So just trying to really chunk it into the 5 most important things. And at that point, do we then offer a service for them to schedule an appointment with a doctor, right? The other area we're looking at is very simple things, kind of similar to what Wilson was saying. Instead of having them call our customer service rep for basic FAQs or having to go onto a website or to our member app to do it, just ask, what's the status of my deductible, right? Or what is a deductible, even more basic. So those are the kinds of areas we're looking at right now.
So if you're building a skill, it requires installation by the user on their own Alexa. So that's a situation where you have to kind of market your marketing or market your service. So talk to us about how you get adoption.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We're looking at a couple of models. The model where we've been toying around quite a bit is, can we create a case for specific types of members sending a dot when they sign up for a particular health insurance plan? Right? So it's part of the kit they receive. It's my ID card for me and my family. Download the mobile app. Oh, by the way, here's your dot. And once you activate it, it knows it's you, right, with a few security checks, and then it starts to walk you through and welcome you in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And Chris, with live person, I'm very intrigued. Is it starting to become live bot?
So I want to talk a little bit about what you said about how we get that going. LivePerson started off as a chat company, moved into a messaging company, mobile messaging, right? And we know that that's taking off in a large way. And so we see like customer service interactions or sales interactions being done via messaging, right? And so that messaging comes in, we have this orchestration, and all that conversation comes in one place. And really making that switch into a voice agent isn't really that difficult, right? Because you have that consumer sitting in your pocket anyway with messaging. And so it's a quick upgrade, right? Which one do you have? Do you have Alexa? Do you have Google? Whatever it may be. Here's your skill that you can throw on there. And now they're everywhere. And the bot works the same across, right? If you look at like messaging interactions, you look at those snippets that are coming in, you look at voice interactions through Alexa, it's the same snippet. It's just handled in a different way. And so one platform that controls all of that and moves people around the journey wherever they are is really what we're at and where we're building. And
what was interesting when at Google I/O they demonstrated the customer service interaction, scheduling a hair appointment, I believe, and it actually spun up some articles afterwards about that. Did they disclose it was a bot? Can you talk to us a little bit about that from both a product and a marketing standpoint? Do you think disclosure is necessary in that world?
I always think that disclosure is important with messaging, right? With back and forth, because one of you gentlemen said it, we talk differently to a machine than we do to a human, right? In that scenario, that one's a little tricky, right? Because it sounds a lot like a human, right? And you can really trick them, but I think disclosure is really important. Google will do things like this call is coming through Google Assistant or whatever it may be, and may just not essentially say that it's a bot, but it'll be upfront and obvious. And I think that cues the right thing for the consumer.
And are you thinking about the same thing in your business?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
And I'm intrigued because voice is a UI. A consumer might have a preference for a different UI.
Right.
Are you guys thinking about that option for the consumer as well? And how is that translating into your product?
So it's all a matter of consumer preference. How do you want to interact with me in what way that you want to? And so, one of our goals is to ensure that we are at every location that you can interact with us, right? Okay. And you may want to switch. You may want to start off in Apple Business Chat, for example, and switch over to Alexa when you get home. And so it's really a matter of preference and routing through there. So it's consumer driven, and our goal is to be everywhere across that, and then have the bot sort of work the same way based on different modality.
Wonderful. Ken, you are literally thetranslationguy.com.
Sorry.
Now, is it the translation guy or translation guy?
Translation guy.
No, the.
Net,
okay.
Actually.
So, we were talking, and your company used to be called 1-800-TRANSLATE, the greatest name in the era of 800 numbers. And then this thing called the internet happened and started to evolve. And now we have this thing called voice happening. As you take and look at this world of voice, and with all of your knowledge of translation, what can you bring to the table to offer as advice for folks who have to be marketing in a multilingual world with their consumers, and they're thinking about how do they engage them?
Translators don't translate anymore. The machines translate for the translators, despite what your translators tell you. The trick is to capture that automation in the process of translation so that you're enjoying the savings rather than the individual translator that's contracting to you or contracting to an agency that provides you with that service. So we get that, with that automation in the written word, it's essential to have the right kind of platform to do it. And then you can achieve translation of great accuracy in a few minutes with a few quality assurance programs. Machine translation, written or spoken, doesn't work straight out of the box. As our industry has been automated from the days of 1-800-TRANSLATE to responsive translation, where we are now, voice really hasn't kept up technology-wise. Real-time voice recognition technologies don't do the jobs. About 90% of our telephone interpretation is medical. So we've got to get it right. If a nurse calls and gets a bad translation and the patient dies, we've got a problem. So we're using live people. Then we feed what we do for voice guys, voice prompts and things like that. We integrate with real-time systems so we can translate this stuff in real time, almost real time. We can record and do the dubbing almost in real time, but it's not real time. It's not for the conversations you're having with Alexa. That's going to be machine generated.
Can I
please,
add to that?
Wilson.
So I think that there is a thought that with technology you can automate a lot of this translation, and that was naively what we thought at first. That like, oh, okay, somebody's asking about the agenda, right? Like, well, we can figure out what that is in German and in Japanese and et cetera, and that would be super easy. And what we found was the speaking mannerisms, what people ask for, they're different, culture by culture, language by language. And so, there was a dream that we thought we could be able to sort of replicate our decision trees and our content and responses. And what we found is that we've had to redo all of them per language. I mean, there's some overlap, but there's a lot where, how you say something in German, apparently, I don't want to offend any Germans in here, but you can imagine just the way that the sentences are structured, and teaching the AIs to recognize the different patterns is an entirely different thing, language to language.
Right. It's the difference between translation and adaptation and localization for the market. And we're doing less translation and more of the adaptation and the post-work to make it work good.
Yeah, we can translate the word, but the context, the sentence, the meaning, how it's structured, that's almost entirely different.
So Ed, as largest insurer in New Jersey, you're dealing with a very multicultural, multilingual population. How do you look at that as you're trying to innovate and test things? I imagine you can't do all at once. You've got to do probably English first and then see where you can go from there?
Absolutely. The largest minority population we have to work with is the Hispanic population, lots of Latinos in New Jersey. And we're trying to get to a point where we can start offering those services as well. But I do think, and it was something I was speaking with Andrew before the panel, even if it starts getting to a point where you could offer up not so much contextual, but even changes in inflection and use of words and perhaps even accent, right? That helps to diminish a lot of the, I don't know who you are and I can't relate to you. I don't know if you wanted to just add to that.
It's this whole concept of, adapting the language that you're using, the verbiage, the intonation, the inflection to the specific use case that you're trying to solve for, whether it's serving someone calling into a call center who's got a tremendous amount of stress about paying a bill or dealing with a medical condition, or selling a house or some other sales application of it, and making sure that you're almost customizing the response to the audience, to the specific person, at the receiving end of that message. And that also includes, frankly, I think, the gender of the voice, and, whether you choose a male voice or a female voice to represent your company in this action. You've got to put a lot of thought. You've got to put yourself into the shoes of the recipient, the audience who's receiving this voice interaction as you're evaluating how you want them to proceed.
One interesting, actually, it reminded me about QA around this. And so my background is actually from the media world. And the last thing you do when you're finishing a TV show or anything with music or anything like that is you play it through the shittiest speaker or the shittiest monitor you can find. And we kind of have a corollary with our QA. We have a guy with the thickest accent in our office. He does our QA. Like if it can get past him, we're pretty confident it can understand most English speakers.
And by the way, I think as companies get more and more international and they pull staff from everywhere. We had a client come to us to help them evaluate a voice for their smart speaker skills that they're going to be rolling out. And most of the team was, they're completely fluent English speakers from around the globe. None of them realized that one of the voices had a southern accent. And it just went over like a lead balloon in the US. It may work regionally in some parts of the country, but for the skill that they were rolling out, it didn't work at all conveying what they were trying to get across. So this idea of QA and making sure that you've got the right voice and you're communicating the right way is critical.
And that's funny because, broadcasters for years and years went for this kind of nondescript accent somewhere from the Midwest, being born and raised in Ohio. It's sort of close to Ohio, but not totally Ohio. So it's interesting to hear that come out technologically now. Let's shift gears a second. Mike, I want to come back to you because we were talking a little bit about what changes in terms of discovery for consumers through voice search and where you have some fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we evolve to a point where people are not necessarily whipping out a phone and typing a search string in or a computer, that type of thing, and move to more speaking type engagements. One of the things that we're really keeping an eye on as we go to market is how do we get discovered, right? Outside, you and I were talking about the paid placement type stuff. That'll always be there, but how do people discover content in a world where you get a single response back as opposed to a whole list of that? And I think I was telling you a company that I used to work with when I was at Capital One, 360i, which is a media company, a very big media company, built a program, if you want to call it that, where all day long it sits there and it asks Alexa, Siri, Cortana, the same types of questions over and over again, and it records the responses back. And so I think we're at a place right now where we don't know how certain, because it's evolving very quickly because you've got AI behind each of these, and the reason why they're doing that, and the reason why they're having it run all day long is because it's changing all day long. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be focused on is how does voice, as it becomes more prevalent, play a role in discovery, and how do we get ourselves into that? And I think you had mentioned that it's not going to be an either-or type thing. You may not just be talking to a device. You may actually be talking to a device that happens to have a screen as well.
Right.
So I think we're in kind of like a new territory right now in terms of how people discover new brand content, those types of things.
I'm interested in getting reaction from whomever wants to react to this. Is it that we're really about to undergo this huge paradigm shift? In marketing, we have been so conditioned to believe we are optimizing all content for discovery on a search engine in hopes that they bless us. Is it now in that voice world where intelligence services are using an awful lot of knowledge about you? What were your prior queries? Where are you physically? What's the weather? What did you do last week? All of these things. That is it a fool's errand to try and ask a question and assess what the answer is, because you'll never get the answer. There's going to be subjectivity and serendipity cooked into the voice assistants as they respond to you. Any thoughts on that?
I think both, not to hedge, but I'll speak specific for our industry. So if you go back to the example I gave, where we have control and we need to control the specific information, for instance, right? we'll deliver that as part of the product offering so that all the specific benefits, et cetera, are listed there. In that case, it's a fairly robust set of things we want to train the voice assistant on. One of the things we're trying to solve for, and it's interesting you brought up SEO, is one of the other things people look for from health insurance apps is finding a doctor. And it's more than a 50x difference in the number of people who look for doctors on Google versus our own app, right here in New Jersey. So the question is, how do you create those linkages when somebody starts saying, Google, find me a, or Alexa, find me a specialist in blah? Do we then find a connection that says, oh, it looks like you're a Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield member. Would you like me to take you to doctors who are in your network? So that still has to exist, I believe, right? So that's
Which means that consumers got to give the service a little bit of knowledge about them
Correct.
in order to curate the right answer.
correct. But then to your earlier point as well, a lot of the intelligent interaction occurs as you bring together all these data streams. When was your last visit? For what? You know, when you called the customer service rep, was there a claim issue or not? And some of the folks have talked earlier about sentiment analysis also. It's detecting, okay, you're aggravated, I need to shift maybe the voice I present to you to be calmer, more, you know, low key, as opposed to somebody who wants to say, hey, great, you're doing great on your wellness program, keep going, right? So.
Well, if you know what I subscribe to, right? So internet's a good example. You know that the pipe that I'm using is a Verizon pipe, and you know that maybe I've installed a skill that is the Horizon skill, and maybe not, right? And you if you're giving up that it's not privacy, but if you're giving that look into you, then you have a much better way to customize that, right? And I look at it that way. I look at who am I using, right?
That's right.
And then how do I customize that? And then you can jump in. So your example of finding a doctor, Alexa should jump in and say, I have a skill, I know how to do that. Like, actually, you can go to my property, and then they're going to go through that process. And then I think the important part of that is that frustration factor, that sentiment factor after the fact, because you may not have that full dialogue built out, or you may not have that really specific thing about like my pinky toe or something like that, right? And so failing over to a process, like you said, it's interesting that you said like, let me calm the voice.
Right.
I look at that failover as an opportunity to go into a human interaction.
Absolutely.
Right? So you move into a human interaction.
Absolutely. And there was a really great example. I forget which magazine had this a couple of months ago, but they were talking specifically about Alexa and how so many queries are related to folks who are either depressed or suicidal. Right? And so my understanding is the Amazon folks are trying to figure out, how do you respond to this, right? Because they will say, I'm not feeling good today, or I'm so-and-so, and they're looking at very simple things like branching to a helpline, a suicide helpline, for instance. But for us, that's very real. Behavioral health is a huge issue, not just in the state, but across America. So I think you're absolutely right. Part of the sentiment analysis, especially in critical moments like this, is that's a handoff to a real rep.
Yeah.
Immediately, or a behavioral health specialist. I think that's a really good point.
I think from a marketing perspective too, I think one of the biggest unknowns and challenges is, you know, the user interface or the channel right now is either Alexa, Google, sometimes Cortana, sometimes Siri. And as opposed to say other search where you're given like a list and you can kind of sort of self-select what you want, that doesn't happen in voice. And so I think that voice SEO, for lack of a better term, is going to be a huge battle. Because, you know, if you ask Google, hey, my foot's hurt, what do I do? That's an opportunity for a healthcare provider to connect with a consumer. But you don't want the Google Assistant to list out 15 different providers and do that connection. So from a user experience standpoint, it becomes Amazon and Google really become kingmakers. And so that's part of the reason why I tell my clients to get in now, is because you need to get that relationship with Amazon and Google and lock it in, because to be frank, I have no idea 2 or 3 years from now how they're going to sort that problem out, right?
So I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of jump out and give the Yex perspective here, because I completely agree. Our philosophy is you're not going to be able to control their UI. The consumer's going to decide what they're going to use, and the services are going to roll out new UIs. You know, this is all about voice, but you know, right now Google has Google Lens. I can go out in the real world and point my camera and it's my search engine for interaction. So there's this UI layer, we can't control the selection. Then there's the AI layer, the algorithmic decision about what is the answer based on whatever they calculate. But then there's a knowledge layer, and the one thing you can control is making sure they know the objective facts about the business, the things that are never going to change, or if they do change, like menus, or you change locations or store hours, et cetera, you're the one who's the source of truth. That is a fundamental shift, because you normally put that on a website and hope it gets crawled and hope it gets to #1, but now because of direct integration, you can be in control of that. The subjective questions, that's where the battle is going to get really interesting. As Dwayne Forrester, my colleague, spoke about on Tuesday, right now nobody's doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, nobody's doing pay-to-play advertising, to my knowledge, in the voice assistants yet. And that's going to be really interesting if and when that opens up, because it will be highly valuable real estate, but the consumer experience is ultimately what those services are going to be concerned about. And I'm intrigued, as somebody whose company who's listening in and thinking about brand and all of these things. Are there any trends or red flags you're seeing, Andrew, as you think about that world?
Well, it's not. I think it's fascinating because those interactions are going to be mediated by these default voices, by the voice of Alexa, the voice of Siri, the voice of Google. Are there ways to choose vocabulary, and we talked a little bit before about intonation, such that a certain audio selection rises to the top of the pile? I think, as you said, it's a bit of an unknown. We just don't know how these services are going to evolve. But what we do know is that user preferences are going to have to be central to that. And so we have to be sensitive to the way that people are asking. Are they asking, did I hurt my foot? Or help, my foot is broken? Or, understanding what people are actually asking and trying to be sensitive to that context, I think, is going to be critical.
I think it's discovery that is the biggest unknown.
Discovery is
right?
big.
Because if I'm using Google and you know what emails I get if you really want to, right? You know all that kind of stuff, and if you're allowing that open, then I hurt my foot automatically goes to Horizon, right? You should just know that, right? And that happens, and that slope will go down. And Google already does that with like Amazon, with who do you use for streaming, right? Do you use Netflix, do you use Amazon, right? You plug that in and then it's known. But discovery is the one that's really unknown. That's the big challenge in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, as marketers, right, as we think about this, and you mentioned kingmakers, right, as these assistants become more intelligent and they know our preferences, for us as consumers, it becomes better, right? So I walk into my kitchen and I say, hey, Siri, play, and I don't even have to say anything. It just starts playing the Grateful Dead because it knows that that's what I want to listen to. But, as marketers, is there a double-edged sword in that if you get within that kind of pattern of an individual, does, you win, but does it block out others? And does it, as a consumer, does it also block out opportunities, as you mentioned, for discovery?
So what does it mean about me that Alexa just keeps playing Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up?
Well, but that's the point, right? Like, so you connected your Alexa to Spotify, and it's permanent collected. How is another music startup going to come in and upend that
Well, it's
experience?
vertically integrated, right? Yeah. Amazon's got its music stack. Right. Apple has its music stack. Google has its music stack.
And for us on this stage, and probably the vast majority of people, that's fine. We like Spotify, but there are different healthcare providers. For us, it's different event providers. Like we want to be the first result that pops up, and that's my big worry. Is I do not have any idea how Amazon and Google are going to figure that out, right? Other than to say, like, we can't answer that right now, for ethical reasons, because they're going to
figure it out to their advantage.
Exactly, to their advantage.
You know what's interesting though? I just saw that LG is coming out with a new OLED television that has Google Assistant cooked into it. So
That's it.
that's it, because why Siri on my phone? Right. It's giving me visual and textual results. So if you combine it with the other display, right, now you've got a best of both worlds. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
So I think it's a modality switch, right? If you're in discovery mode, you're going to do a modality switch, right? You're going to switch over, you're going to look at something else, you're going to use a screen. Like we're not going to be in a world where there are no screens, right? It's just that we're choosing to use one as a discovery, as a starting point, because that's things that we're used to. We're going to do that because that's things that we're doing. And those are companies that we work with. But that switch to a different surface is really going to be the trick here. And that's where discovery is going to happen. That's where I'm going to consciously choose to choose a different healthcare provider. Like, that's where I'm going to make that conscious decision. And our job here is to make sure that that doesn't happen for our services, right? So let's make our services better, and let's make that interaction so good that you don't want to switch. Let's make that call to not even customer care, but like that call to make something happen. Like let's make that really good and use that opportunity to make it so that they don't want to switch.
So this being a CMO panel, I want to end with a conversation about brand. I want to start with you, Andrew, because part of branding is audible. If I do bum, 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 granted it's not completely tonally right, but that's NBC. If I do bum, 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 we are farmers.
That's right.
Do brands need to be thinking about an audible brand more so than in the past? Question one. And then question two for us to ponder, do we now need to be cooking into our other advertising an old school phrase, ask for it by name? Because if they see it on television and they're interacting with a voice, you don't want them asking the generic, you want them asking the specific. So I'm interested in everybody as they think about that for their brand.
So I'll give you two statistics. One, which I'm sure most of the people in this room are familiar with, that 50% of searches are going to be by voice by 2020. That just shows you the way that the world is moving towards interacting with it with an audio first approach. The second statistic, this is drawn from the advertising world, Nielsen did a study, 60% of the time that people are watching television, their attention is on a different screen, or they're out of the room. And so you can shut off your eyes, you can walk out of the room, you can't shut off your ears. And so brands, I think, are going to have to move audio back to the center of their branding strategy. If you don't have an audio strategy, you're going to be left behind, whether by virtue of letting people walk out of the room, or, as you guys have just been talking about, not experimenting and gaining some experience in the audio-centric world, in the audio marketing world. Other companies will figure it out first, and will be there unless you start at least paying attention to it now. So that's our approach, and we help our clients understand how to interact better in that audio-centric world. But there's audio logos, there's voice, there's intonation, vocabulary, catchphrases, calls to action. There's all sorts of ways to approach the audio world. That's how we think about it.
Excellent. Other thoughts?
Well, I mean, coming from media and whatnot, like the short answer is yes, right? Like you're gonna really have to start to pay attention to that more so. I think that a lot of the challenge, though, is most of us don't build that voice, the voice, right? Like we can, there's technology available. It's a big engineering effort. So most of us are relying on Amazon and Google and so forth. And rightly so, Apple and all those companies have spent a lot of time adjusting the voices so you know that that's Siri versus you know that that's Alexa. And I think it goes back to that problem is, I would love for my company to develop its own voice, develop its own sounds, but we're at the mercy of these channels at the moment. And I suspect in a couple of years, there'll probably be some GUI that you can, I wanted to sound more gruff and it should be a man, and like with this intonation and he should respond this way. But in the meantime, I think that we're really beholden to those channel providers.
But I think you can do it without changing the tone of the voice. It's more of the conversation, right? So if I want to work with an insurance company and they choose that they want to have like a really perky female voice, right? You don't have to have the voice be that. You can make the automation and the AI talk about that, right? You can add those little inflection points. We look at duplex, right? Google Duplex, right? It added that, right? That little thing in there that makes it sound human, and that's the voice, right? And so you could do that across the board. And I think that applies for your entire set of conversation, whether it's in messaging, whether it's on a voice assistant, whether it's even the rules that you give to your agents in the contact center. Like, you can do that.
So I think it's a really interesting question. You didn't put it on the list of questions that you were going to ask us.
Surprise.
Which is great. But I'm a big brand guy, right? So when I was head of marketing at Marriott, we had very specific profiles for each of our hotel brands, Renaissance, JW, that type of thing. And then one of the things I did when I was at Capital One is I launched the Quicksilver card, and that was an inflection point for the company in that we were going from funny white guys like Alec Baldwin and Jimmy Fallon, and we wanted to leverage the celebrity talent that we used in that launch, which ended up being Samuel Jackson, to really kind of mark a different era in the company and that type of thing. And we spent a lot of time doing a lot of research around a lot of different celebrities and everything. And believe it or not, everybody likes Samuel Jackson. Whether you're young, male, female, they just think he's cool, right? And he's trustworthy and he says it like it is. It would not have been practical to have Samuel answering customer service questions, but with Capital One, branding was really, really huge. We invested a lot of money in television to create that brand. I think it's a really interesting question. Would a company go so far as to take a celebrity voice and bake that into a voice assistant as a way to cement that brand even further?
Well, we all know certain celebrity voices that are the voiceover.
Yeah.
Right? That was one of the great ways
Sure.
that celebrities would make money, especially out of the U.S. market, when they didn't want to compromise the commerciality of their kind of image.
Yeah, Randy Quaid was a huge voiceover guy. You never saw Randy Quaid in our ads, but he was the voice of Capital One ads for years and years and years. So
I'm just imagining Samuel L. Jackson being like your voice assistant in a hospital. It would be.
No, I don't think
I might just go to the hospital just to hear.
He was the voice assistant to put you in the hospital, right?
Interesting.
If he was in this Pulp Fiction mode.
Waze has a selection of celebrity voice
Yes,
assistants.
that was
It's
going to be my
quite
next
interesting.
question.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that Google has John Legend as one of the celebrity voices. I'm intrigued, is that, and I'd be really interested in your thoughts, does that actually give away some of the brand? We all think of Alexa with a very specific voice. Do you compromise the brand of your voice assistant as one of those providers if you are offering so many different variations?
I think so. I think I think it's a branding play for Google, right?
Sure.
John Legend, right? That's it, right? But I don't know if that goes on for long term, right?
Right.
So Waze was there. I remember driving around and we chose Mr. T for a long time. So we're driving and it's like, Mr. T. But like that just helps me connect with Waze as a brand. It doesn't help me connect with Mr. T. It doesn't make me associate Mr. T with Waze, right? And it's all about how that interaction happens. I don't think the voice itself makes that. I think it's what you're doing with that voice.
Interesting.
That makes the difference.
And it's something that Andrew and Wilson said. It looks like for marketers, we're going to have to go back to the days pre-TV, when it was all audio, radio, to really mind that for where we go next. And it's a challenge for our organization because that visual cue of that Blue Cross and Blue Shield, that's it. You get that 80 plus years of trust right there. And I don't think we want to mess around with different voices. As much as I said, let's get different inflections for certain situations. So I do think it's that notion of the greeting and the goodbye, always reinforcing, thank you for using Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey. I wouldn't go the direction you were suggesting with the audio brand.
Yeah.
When you talk, I think of riding the subway, right? Before the automated voices on the subway, it was like,
That's right.
right? But now it's really
pretty
clear,
good.
right? I don't care what it sounds like.
That's
but
right.
I know
That's
it,
right. That's right.
and I'm used to it.
That's right.
Well, we have reached the end of our time, and rather than open it up to Q&A, I want to reserve about 10 minutes so that if you have an individual question, you can come up and ask our panelists because they represent such a broad swath of industries and experience. So we will do that, but before we do, please put your hands together and thank our panelists today.